in one. This, yeah, this one. Today we have the honor of have Emir, who is someone who has been attending, I think, all the seminars. So
I try.
he's from home, and he. Well, let me read a little bit of Emir. Like he's currently a senior research associate at the Center for Technology, Strategic, and Sustainability in ASB, our neighbors. He had a master in economics from University Putra, Malaysia, UPM, and one master in political science and political economy at LSE. And he did his undergrad in UCLA. So Emir's research interest is in political economy, and soon he will go to NYU to study his PhD. So hope to see you here after.
I will, yeah, that's right.
And today he's gonna talk about the effects of social mobility on political selection. So as usual, you have 1 hour, and the floor is yours. And thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you everyone for coming. So this topic is still being fleshed out. It's not been finalized yet. It's really a brown bag seminar. And I've been working on this project for the past 7 months, collecting data and also thinking about the research design and how to approach this, tackle this problem. So just to give you some preview of what the presentation will be, I think the question that I was interested in is the question of how does politician social mobility affects voter welfare. So in many developing countries, including Malaysia, right, winning political office can improve one's social status in society. And what I did was I tried to modify the Besley 2004 politician entry model to include social mobility considerations. So this model is primarily to study the effect of wages on voter welfare and political selection. But what I did was I tried to modify that model to include also social mobility considerations. And so the outcomes of the model that I modified was that it changes voter welfare in 3 aspects. It changes the welfare in terms of the pool of available politicians, the information on politician type, and politicians' policy choice. And so what I try to do then is to sketch a brief empirical idea to really identify the effect of social mobility on politicians' pool. As we know, social mobility is endogenous. It's very much difficult to identify that effect, right? And so what the model tries to do is to parse out what is the definition and of social mobility, try to formalize what does it mean, and what does it mean when we talk about politicians' pool. So this is the preview of the whole presentation. So there's no results.
So you're just using status and mobility interchangeably right now?
Status is what the outcome is. Mobility is the regime, the process in which you get the status. So that's the definition that I think is to distinguish that. In terms of the empirical results, there's none. So for identification purposes, there's no.
I'm just wondering why you use the word aristocrat in the title, because like when you talk about this, usually people talk about like political elites rather
Yeah,
than.
so this is what basically the social mobility, it defines within the politicians' labor market. It's not defined in the larger sense of society. It just depends on the people who are selected into that job. So within the political elite sphere is the model would be.
Okay.
I think you'll see the model soon enough, and then probably understand what I mean. And so before I start, I think some motivation to like sort of clarify the ideas that I have. So on your right side or left side, the guy who's holding the flag, right? So in 1974, he narrowly won his seat by 300 votes. So narrowly won the seat, right? And the guy on the left or on your right, he narrowly lost by a few hundred votes. The guy on the right was one of the founding members of DAP. So he was a very big guy during that time. My grandpa actually knows the guy, but I don't know him. And I think no one in the room knows him. His name is Yap Kim Guan. I don't think you guys know him. But on the left is Tan Sri Velu. So he's the guy who became a famous politician in Malaysia. He has won elections for 9 times. He became a Ministry of Works. Everyone knows him. And just based on that small win and lost, it changes the fate of one person entirely. So before that, he was a bus conductor before he became a politician. So because we're all economists in this room, we don't believe in stories. I'll give you some empirical motivation. So it's actually late, not overall effect. So what I did was I took all the elections from 1959 till now, and I took the close races, and the outcome is on whether or not they receive a datukship. So datukship is a title that they'll get, and it's endowed by the state in the downstream outcomes, and I see the effect, right? And so the effect is pretty large, about 9%. The late, not the overall line. Yep. Sorry, that's a typo there. And I control for all the election year variable, the election race variable. And so this is the effect I recovered.
Sorry, is that sorry, you must mention it. I was writing that, but here, is it the pool across multiple elections?
Multiple what?
Like multiple elections.
Yes, all the way back from 1959 till now. So I look at all the people who narrowly won and narrowly lost. So it's basically like a coin toss, right?
How many elections? And this is only for MP or for minister?
Oh, so this is for the parliament election. So there's about 5,000 races from 1959, and the close races is about 600 of them.
So it's only for MP candidates.
Only for MP candidates. But I would probably expect that for state level, it's probably similar. I couldn't find the state level data, but the federal election, this is the effect that I recovered. Of course, you can say that there's a lot of different variables to consider, but it is the closest that we could get in terms of the randomized control trial.
That's a huge effect, though, huh?
Huge effect. I was a bit surprised by this, but I think if you look at the literature, there is a paper before this that studies the effect of winning an election in England on their overall downstream wealth outcomes. Also recovered the same thing. But I think the question that they didn't answer, and what this thing doesn't tell you, is what is its effect on voter welfare. Clearly, the datukship in this particular graph is a premium for people who win the elections. But what is the effect of that on voter welfare? That is still a question that I wanted to answer. And so this is the research question. So in Malaysia, political careers can lead to improvement in social status. So datukship is an improvement, a huge improvement in social status by a long mile. And does this institutional arrangement improve voter welfare? And so one takeaway, if you don't want to do the math, because there's going to be a lot of math after this, just know this last line, which is that social mobility would change the pool of politicians.
So by social mobility, you mean the possibility of having this improvement in social status will change the set of people who want to stand for elections.
That's very good. So social mobility means that there's different. So social mobility is basically the process in which you can achieve that. So the way I conceptualize it in the model later is a lifetime benefit after you step down from office. So you would win the election, and you would have some procedures to achieving that status, and then after you leave office, you get a permanent increase in your utility.
But these are non-pecuniary benefits, or can be pecuniary benefits also? How should I think of them?
So it doesn't mean pecuniary benefits. It's just simply like an abstract benefit, like in terms of your social. But basically, what I'm saying is, all else equal, people who are a non-datuk and a datuk they would have more utility for them. That's the way I conceptualize it.
I just want to ask, when you talk about datukship, do you treat this datukship like some sort of a shop here?
No.
Or it's just you win election, you got a datuk, and then
So
your mobility increase?
That's a very good question. I think the way I treat it is the process in which you can get it. So I'll explain later. So there are two ways where you can get it. So there's the merit mobility regime and also the patronage mobility regime, and I will explain it later in the later slides and how you get that. So the way I conceptualize the datukship is more like the benefit that you get after you leave office indefinitely.
So the social mobility. Sorry. Mobility is for the
Politician. Yes, that's right.
You're not explaining social mobility as a macro.
No. I'm not talking about the people who rise up from the top B40 to the T20. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about people who are politicians, enter the office, and then they get the benefit of the office after they leave office indefinitely.
So it's like politician labor market.
And can I ask you an empirical fact in the data, like people who win elections become get a dato-ship, what is the average tenure that they spend in office then?
That one, that's a very good question. I have no information on that because of the sparse of the data, and it's something that I've been trying to do. But it's a very good point.
It just, I mean, in terms of it's also important semantic in terms of how you want to frame the benefit, right? Is
Exactly.
it
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
after office, or it's just a continuing stream of
Yeah.
benefits, right?
So the way I do it is they attain a continuous benefit after they leave office.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that benefit is discounted in the future. So yeah, that's the standard way to do it.
Just two comments. I think the term social mobility is very confusing because
Yeah.
it seems that
Yeah.
it's more about like incentive for the politician. It's not really about social mobility. And I
Yeah.
think the second one is what is the mechanism you have in mind that why if politicians get the datorship, that will have like welfare implications on society because this is an incentive for them to do a better performance. Is the datorship actually conditional on doing a good performance or not? I have this.
So there will be, you see the model later. So the way that the model works is that you have, so you're gonna see how it works in the model and how the benefits introduction would change the calculation of entering the office.
I love models, but is the model is this motivated by a fact or how does datorships for politicians
Yeah.
work in?
So this is the motivation.
Oh, okay. So your model will be able to rationalize this.
Yes.
Okay, perfect.
So this is
Perfect.
basically
Sorry.
This is basically what the model is trying to explain.
Okay.
So the empirical fact, right, tells you that this is the effect. But what I'm trying to say is that there's a downstream outcome for the welfare. So
Perfect.
that's
Okay.
that's the effect. Okay, that's good. Thanks. Other questions? Go for it.
Just to follow up on what Rajesh mentioned on tenureship, I'm wondering whether you have the data to kind of see whether these people who get the tenureship, are they more likely to kind of win their follow-up elections?
It's a very good question. I have no answer to that, but I can check. And my sense is that they will probably win more.
Yeah.
That's my guess. Yeah. But the thing is, so the benefits can only be realized after they leave office. So that's the important assumption that I'm making as well.
And that's key to your model.
Key to my model, important to the model. And you don't get the benefit if you're in office.
Because maybe we can come back to that because that's why I was kind of trying to understand. Yeah.
But what I'm trying to do first, I'll just go. So this is the literature. So but the thing is, what I want to do first is to just give you the baseline model of the Besley. I think for a lot of people in the room, I can try to explain first how the model works and how I modify that model to actually account for the for the mobility, pardon my words, considerations. So the baseline model setup, it follows from Besley. The T is infinite, 1, 2, 3, and forever. And election is held at all periods. So there's two players, the voter and the politician. So the politician make a policy choice denoted by ET. It's either 0 or 1. And it can match the set of the world, 0, 1, where each state is equally likely. And the voter receives delta if the state is matched, 0 otherwise. So each politician can only serve at most 2 terms. This is a very important assumption here, because this assumption, it can be broken, but it's very difficult. The model will be intractable if I break this assumption. So that's the key assumption I think Rajesh is sort of hinting at. And the voter and politician discounts the future by beta less than 1. So to answer your question, the voter actually gets delta if the policy introduced matches the state of the world, and it will be 0 otherwise.
Okay.
And so there are 2 types of politicians, either congruent or dissonant. So the proportion of congruent politicians in a population is gamma, and each politician of type tau has an outside radius of W and 0. It's a uniformly distributed function. The key point here is that so that's basically the reason why there's a difference between who runs and who doesn't run. The congruent and the dissonant politicians. And the type doesn't change across time.
But you're going to tell us what you mean by congruent and dissonant.
That's right. So for the congruent politicians, they will get an ego rank each term in the office. So every time they're in the office, they get ego rank E. For the dissonant, they will receive an ego rent E in each term, and they can take out a rent if, let's say, their state doesn't match each other, and the rent is actually distributed with a CDF G, and the mean is mu. And the assumption here is that the big R, which is the maximum of the rent, is larger than the discounted expected benefit from the dissonant politician. So from a voter's perspective, there is an incentive for the dissonant politician to actually choose a different state from different policy from the state of the world.
So sorry again. So the dissonant politician receives his ego rent plus gets an additional benefit when the state of the world doesn't match the. So it is. But what's how should I think of it conceptually? It's something like person that is a siphoning off of funds because I purposefully don't match the state because it gives me private benefits, or what is the?
Or you could basically do a policy that's match more on the corporate interest instead of the voters' interest.
Okay, yeah, okay. So that's
a very good, yeah, that's a really good way to think about it. And yes, you're right. It's a labor market of politicians. That's the way. That's the framing of this model.
How does the wage endowments work? The one that outside wages, the one that you showed.
Oh, sorry.
Is that also distributed across congruent dissonant politicians?
Yes. So different. Yes. So different. That's a very good point. Different types have a different maximum. So the WCWD is different. So it's not the same. It can be not the same, and that would really depend on the maximum of the wages.
And this is a function, and eventually it will be a function of this.
So it's a uniform distribution.
Oh,
So,
okay.
yeah,
Is
so,
exogenous?
this one is uniformly distributed. So it's like if you have a population of people, and there's each person basically gets a random allotment of their wages.
So the outside wage will not depend on the data ship or whatever.
No. It would just be. So this is just the baseline. So we don't have any mobility regimes at all. No,
Okay.
none of this. So this is just the baseline. So just compare it with.
Oh, but the type doesn't affect the draw of the wage they get.
So
outside wage,
the type doesn't. Yeah, the type doesn't. So the idea here is that you are born and you get a type. Either you're congruent or you're
okay.
dissonant.
The sentence seems like it makes it sound like that each type has different wage endowment. Sounds like it's
Oh no, sorry, no, it's not. So it can coincide with each other. That's the point. So this is timing. So the state of the world and the politician of the type tau is drawn, and politician chooses the action and they decide whether to run for re-election. The voter observes the period payoff and they decides to re-elect the incumbent if the incumbent runs for re-election. And the T+1, the state of the world is drawn. If the voter does not decide to re-elect the incumbent, the timing it goes back to the T. But if they decide to run again, the incumbent and the new politician, they choose the action. They can no longer decide to run for election because it's a term limit, which is a very important assumption. Voter observes payoff, incumbent exits the game, and it restarts with fresh politicians. The concept is the perfect Bayesian equilibrium. So this is the setup.
And I will, as a voter, I only vote in the incumbent if he matches the state of the world.
Exactly. So the re-election rule is that they re-elect incumbent if politicians choose the policy. The rule can change, but what the PBE, the perfect Bayesian equilibrium would be is that you have to assume this rule and then you have to check whether or not this rule is optimal. The idea here is that you can have a voter that is very sophisticated, but I think I don't want to complicate the model even further. So just have the simple re-elect the incumbent if the politician actually choose the same state of the world. So for congruent politicians, they would run to office if and only if their ego rent, their E, right, their big E, is larger than their wage they get from outside, right? So if you're like a lawyer, for example, the ego rent in the office is higher, you will run for office. And if they get reelected, they will choose the same policy as the state of the world, so they will get reelected. And since like the E is larger than the W for term 1 and term 2, recruitment implies retention. They were willing to run again. And the proportion of the congruent politicians who will contest the election because of the uniform distribution of wages is just E over WC. So if you're smaller than E, if your E is smaller than W, then you will be like, okay, you know what? I'm not going to run. It's too much. Ego rent. It's not worth it. I'm not going to run.
But if I'm in the second term around, I don't redraw my wage. So it only draws at the end start of the game.
So if I get second term, I can't run again. Right? I can't run again because
no, the second term. Suppose I was elected.
Mhm.
I was congruent.
Yeah.
So by definition, I choose AT is equal to ST.
Yep.
Now, when the second time comes around,
The W will change.
am I going to draw again my WT?
No, no,
No,
it'll be the same.
it's the same.
Same W. Yeah.
So the E is conceptually a non-monetary. So is this question.
So E can be many things. E can be the perks of the office, can be the wages of the politician as well, plus the perks of the office, like having a security guard, all the allowances. So these are like E is conceptualized as the reward that you get if you become a politician in office. And so the next is the dissonant politician, which is the more interesting part of the analysis. So in the second term, the dissonant politician, they always choose the non-congruent policy. Ego rank is larger plus the rent is always larger than the E. So you're like Donald Trump. You're not gonna win the next election anymore. You're not gonna contest anymore. You can do whatever you want. So that's the dissonant politician. In term one, the dissonant politician would only choose the same state if, let's say, the rent is smaller than the future reward that you get in the next term. So the probability is just the integral of the G here, and then you integrate it across the wages. And W is the maximum wage a dissonant politician forgo in the private sector to become a politician. So yeah, straightforward. So now we assume that, I think you were asking a very good question there, that the dissonant politician, right, they're willing to serve another term if, let's say, the wages that they get from the office is smaller, outside of the office is smaller than the ego rent plus the expected rent out of the next term, right? And so what we did was what he did was the computing of the value of a political career, which is the expected benefit that you get if you choose the congruent policy in the first term, and you expected the benefit that you choose the policy of the non-congruent policy in the first term. And so this is the expected benefit of it. I compare with the outside wages forever. And what I did was, and if you compare these two wages, you actually get this nice equation where it conforms to the previous assumption that I made, which is the W is less than E plus mu, which means that the dissonant politicians who are willing to run are also those who are willing to serve a second term. So if they do a congruent policy in the first term, they will always run the second term. And so the proportion of the dissonant who are willing to run is then this maximal W over the WD. And so you get the probability that the politician is congruent, given that there is gamma proportion of congruent people in the population is just this pi. Okay, so this is just the base rule. And then for the voter optimization, you just have to do the base rule and you actually get this optimal. So we're done. This is the baseline model.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I would do is just repeat the same process that I did here on a different institutional arrangement. And that is the social mobility process that I mentioned. Yeah. And so now we go to the merit mobility. So now, for every politician, if they serve 2 terms, they will receive a lifetime benefit B on top of their outside wages. So they think of the lifetime benefit as an increase in social status, and the benefit can only be realized after the period when the politician stops serving. So we have the same assumption, so that there's an incentive to collect rent from the perspective of the voter. Yeah. So this is the merit mobility regime. And what I would do, I would compare the welfare of the voter with this baseline model. So that's what the model would do. Yeah.
So this is just a clarifying question outside the model. Like how does the datorship works in Malaysia? Like you'd receive it based on actually merit or
I don't know. That is something that I actually have no idea on.
Okay.
And something that I will have to study more. But essentially, you can think about the merit and also the patronage style.
Okay.
Where you have if you are a good politician who serve the people, you get the datorship, or you could be like a politician who just like takes out rent and then suddenly you get a datorship for some reason.
Because maybe I'm wrong, but you can also kind of buy it, no, or not?
I don't know about that. Huh?
No, that's why I asked, because a lot of things is like it's stochastic. You don't know what
Okay.
type.
No, because the point is, I think where are you going? And this will make sense
Yeah.
if the datorship is actually a signal
Yeah.
of that merit that you
Yeah.
did something. If it's something that you can buy, then it's a very noisy signal
Exactly,
and probably not informative.
So I
at
mean,
all.
like what you can do. I mean, in terms of like more data, you probably at each electoral cycle, like distinguish how many daktokship that politician got and the non-politician got. So that portion.
So I would show you later on
Matters.
how we can identify that. Essentially, if you are a first-time politician and suddenly you get Dato, I would categorize it under the patronage. But I'll explain later on what the other regimes are, and I compare these regimes together, and I look at the welfare, the effect on the voter welfare. So that's the main purpose of this presentation, actually. So it's the same process. I don't think I'm gonna go any further. But if you have any questions regarding the model equations and whatnot, just ask me and you can clarify it. But essentially, it's the same process. It doesn't change the procedure at all.
So what do you mean by merit mobility now?
So merit means if you serve 2 terms, you get a lifetime benefit fee outside of on top of the wages that you get in outside of office. So you get a lifetime benefit fee.
So why do you call it merit?
I call it merit because you serve 2 terms.
But why the merit is not that you are always a congruent politician?
So
Because if you do that, you can actually say that with this system, you can sustain an equilibrium where there is even no re-election. Because right now the baseline model only works because there is re-election.
yeah,
If it's only one period, they will deviate.
yeah.
But with this merit-based arrangement, you can actually give an incentive for being a congruent politician. No.
Yeah, you're right. But I think if you are a politician,
Mhm.
right? And then if you let's say in the practical world, if you don't know if it's a congruent or dissonant policy, right? So you will have this rule saying that if you serve 2 terms, you're gonna get it.
But then in the second term, I'm gonna deviate anyways.
Yeah, basically that's the.
So it's not merit-based.
So I'm gonna contrast that with another type
Okay,
of mobility regime, and I think you can sort of get the point that I was trying to receive. But even if let's say this sort of like rule was established, even let's say we disregard the second term, what I actually found was that the welfare effect is actually positive. Comparing the baseline and comparing this mobility regime, it actually is better for the voter because the pool would improve.
And again, and by improving pool, how do you so that's what so it's okay. So
It's the pie. So the pie, the rate of the change of the W is smaller than the rate of change of the beta square over 1 minus beta.
thus the probability the politician is congruent is given that there are gamma proportional.
So this one is larger. If you increase the B, it's larger than this one. So that's why it's better than the.
So more congruent politicians are likely to select themselves in for office
Exactly. That's basically the insight.
because now it close. I'm just still thinking out loud, and it has a greater incentive effect for congruent versus discordant or discongruent, whatever you want to call them. And what? So can you tell me, like, just intuitively, why is the incentive effect greater for these guys?
So the dissonant, for example, they are disciplined to do a congruent policy in the first term, right?
Yeah,
And then in the second term,
they'll always defect.
they always do whatever they want.
Yeah.
For the congruent, they would do both, right?
They'll always be. They
So-
only enter if they are
So-
want. Yeah.
So the pool will get more congruent people in it,
Okay.
but the dissonant, they are more disciplined to do the congruent in the first term.
Sorry, but why the higher B attract more congruent? I miss
It
this.
is. Yeah, that's what I was asking. Does it attract more congruent,
It
or
attracts.
does it make,
Attracts.
or does it discipline the discongruent to be congruent more in time period one?
Both at the same time.
The second one I understand.
Yeah.
Because
but the
now you have a
one-
greater incentive because your future benefit stream is higher, so it has more binding the constraint. And why does it attract more congruent people?
Because the E plus the future effects of the B is this one, this on the right hand side gets larger.
And why doesn't it get larger in the same ratio for the non-congruent people?
So for the non-congruent people, they still get that, But the thing is, like, they have to do a congruent policy in the first term.
So if I would write down the equation, I would see that the incentive effect is greater. So what is the functional form assumption that I need for that?
So basically, like, if you do the welfare voter, so you
Yeah.
have the pie, right? That's the pool, and you have the delta, the gamma, which is the basically the probability that the dissonant would actually do the congruent policy in the first term, right? And so the source of the welfare gains is the fact that the pool of politicians are improving and the dissonant politicians are disciplined to choose the congruent policy. The welfare loss is actually information because more dissident politicians will not choose to reveal their type
In the first
in
period.
the first period. But then the information loss is smaller than the disciplining and the pool effect, the selection effect.
Yeah, I'm still don't see what is the parameter assumption that you need to improve the pool.
The parameter, what do you mean by that?
Because so the second effect is very clear, right? It's only in operation for dissonant politicians. You know, my second period benefit is going to be greater, like when I leave office. So I need smaller, I'm more happy to be congruent in period one. But what I'm asking is, but this increase in benefit that is affecting the congruent benefit politician is also the same increase in benefit is also coming about for the discongruent politician. Why is
Okay.
what is happening to how is the slope being differentially affected is what I'm trying to understand.
So for congruent politician, right? So not everyone's going to run for election. So people who are going to run for election, if their wages is larger, if the wages is smaller, they will not run for election, right? So the idea here is that the benefit would actually push the incentive for them to actually be okay with it. So in the first term, the lawyer be like, you know what, the wages is not going to be, my wages is higher, right? Suddenly with this datorship prospect, wow, the datorship is even larger than the wages that I get as a lawyer. So I will actually motivate myself to go and run for office.
But why doesn't the discongruent one do the same thing? Is what
They would. They would have the same effect, but the effect, the minus would be the gap is larger for the increase. The rate of increase would be larger for the congruent.
That's what I'm asking. What
So
makes
right now-
the rate of increase larger?
Yeah, that one I don't know. That one is linear. That one is linear.
That must be some kind of functional form assumption.
It has to be, but
Yeah.
for me right now I'm using linear forms. Yeah.
I just want to clarify, like during each election cycle, you are assuming like the congruent and dissonant type are equally likely to get elected at the same time.
Exactly. That's right. Yeah, equally likely to get elected.
Okay.
But this is just assumption.
I think it will be a little bit easier if you relax the assumption that the wage distribution is equal between congruent and
The wage distribution?
non-congruent. Yeah, because
It's not the same. It's not the same.
they have different distributions.
So it's uniform,
Yeah.
but the maximum can be different.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because then it's kind of like a span of control of Lucas. Like the congruent guys, they have like a higher wage outside.
Exactly.
So then I understand that if the benefits of being politicians are larger because you get this datu status, then guys smart and honest like Rajesh will try to run as politicians, and then I understand the part about okay.
Okay, so basically that's the fact, and the rate of increase is larger for the dissonant, for the congruent. Sorry.
Is that the way that the improvement of the tool is primarily through the type wage differentials?
Exactly. You're right. Basically, the pool,
It's the only mechanism by which the pool can be
the wage. The increase in this one is larger than the increase in this one. The difference of wages. The difference in the outside wages.
Sorry, how does the datorship factor into this again?
The datorship factor, because for the congruent politician, right? They would be okay. There's in term one. If it's a baseline model, I'm a lawyer. My outside wages is larger than the politician's just ego ran, right? But if let's say you're in a merit mobility regime, the benefit of the social status would actually outweigh benefit of social status plus the ego ran would be larger than my wages in my job as a lawyer.
But how does the ego run? Going back to it, how does the ego run
Conceptualize?
be affected by the datorship?
No, it wouldn't be. It's independent. independent. So the benefit can only be realized after you leave office. Yeah. So the idea here is that if you're thinking of the long term, if you're future oriented, if you get this social status improvement, you still get motivated to run for office. Yeah.
You try to differentiate the datukship politician as by state.
Okay, that's the empirical facts. Let's put a hold on that. But that's a very good question. Yeah.
Just a clarification. So, is there a revolving door policy in Malaysia where I think in the US politicians and businessmen, like or lawyers and all that, they actually just like move back and forth. Like, they serve in one term policy and then go back to business and go back again to policy. Would that also? How would that impact the model here?
That will probably change the outside wages, W. But right now, what I'm assuming is that the wages is the same for everyone. For if you're a one person, your wages is the same T1 and T5 and T20. T equals like 17 or whatever. It's be the same. But it would probably change that wages. But you're right, the model will change. But that would need to it would complicate the model a bit more.
But is that relevant for the case of Malaysia? Like is there a revolving door?
I don't know. I don't know. Actually, I don't know. Okay, so the patronage mobility, right? Is a politician, they can only receive the benefit if, let's say, they use their rank. So we remove that merit, mobility, right? And we introduce this institution where the politician can only receive the benefit of the social status improvement if they use their rent to purchase the cause. So this is the patronage mobility regime that you were hinting at.
Okay.
You were predicting it. So the main decision for the dissident politician is to either buy the benefit in period 1 or to buy in period 2. It's a similar strategy for congruent politician, and there's no improvement in pool. Congruent politician is not going to be motivated because they're not going to get the benefit at all because they cannot take out the rent. And the similar strategy for the voter as baseline in equilibrium. Okay,
but you could imagine if B is big enough that I could keep, and depending on how E, B, and W line up, even a congruent politician might want to still buy this benefit, right?
Yes, it would. That's a very realistic scenario. But in this model, I'm not assuming that, just for simplistic purposes. Okay, and so period 2, the student always collect the rent and the purchase the benefit if, let's say, the cost is smaller than the benefit that they get in the future. And assume that this condition holds, that means the politician, they always face the same decision in the period 1. So they will always buy the benefit if they choose to take rent in period 1. So if this condition holds, right, the politician will always buy the benefit, but the choice is like which period they're going to buy. So the thing is, like, you either buy at term 1, but your rent is small in term 1, but you might as well buy in term 2, right? So you can always you need to choose when you purchase that rent. Okay, so I would do the same thing, right? But the idea here is that the probability that the dissident politician is congruent in term 1 would decrease as the benefit increase, and the probability would increase as the cost, the Z, would increase. And so the maximum wage would also follow the changes in the probability. As a result, the probability of a random politician being congruent decreases as B increases. Okay. And so in terms of welfare, increasing the benefit actually decreases the probability, the pool. The information, it improves. So there's the source of welfare gain because the dissident politician would reveal their tax more often. And in equilibrium, we actually see less policies being introduced that are congruent. So basically there's a weakening of the discipline. And what I did was, the full model, the reason why I do all this, why I distinguish between a patronage and a merit, is because so that in the real world, we can have both. We can have both a merit-based system and a patronage-based system, and I wanted to compare with the baseline. So if you imagine if you have a patronage-based mobility and a merit-based mobility, and you compare it with a society where there's no social status. So that's basically the goal of this paper. So the congruent politicians, they can improve their status through public service, right? And the dissident politicians can improve their status through patronage, right? So the best outcome that in this regime is as good as the merit mobility regime. It's as good as that. The worst outcome, it depends, but it's not worse than the patronage regime. The point here is that if you believe that your society has a lot of patronage in it, introduction of the merit mobility regime, just having a rule of saying, you know what, if you serve 2 terms, you can get the datukship, is better than none at all. So that's the insight of this model. So the dissident politician also has an option either to choose to improve their status through service or rent. At the same time, the B generates the incentive for congruent to run for election, which actually improves the pool of politicians. So the wages for the dissident politician is given by this, and if you differentiate it by B, these 3 terms would disappear, and you would actually see the convergence to beta. And for the congruent, it's the same as the merit. And so if the Z is very high, we'll go back to the merit case. If the worst outcome is when the B is very high, the disciplining effect for the dissident politician would reduce, but you also have the positive selection of the congruent. So that's the dual effect that is ambiguous, right? Okay. So this is justification. So although the probability of dissident action increase as B increase, adding a merit mobility in place improves the pool of politicians as compared to patronage regimes. At its worst case, the voter welfare is only worsened due to increases in B when the negative disciplining effect dominates the positive selection effect. So you increase the B, more of the dissident politicians are going to get enticed by that benefit. They would be less disciplined to do what they want to do. But on the other hand, for the congruent, they get more motivated to go into office because of this merit-based mobility regime. Merit-based, they know they can serve 2 terms and they can get that merit-based. So this is the justification for that mobility. And so this is the welfare review. To cap it off, I think it's the easy, just the table makes it easy for everyone to see. So meritocracy, right? You see an increase in the improvement of the pool. Can I use the? Yeah, you can. And there you go. You can see the improvement of the pool, but for information, there's a loss. For the disciplining effect, it's improved, and the welfare is overall is improved. For the patronage, the pool gets reduced, information improves, the disciplining effect would reduce, but the welfare overall would reduce.
But sorry to again bother you, but like in the first row now that you're showing again, for overall welfare to improve has to have some parameter restrictions, right, for you to achieve it, right? That's not because if all the arrows were placing up, then it's by definition. But right now, it's not. There must be some underlying conditions for it to be fulfilled, right?
Exactly. You're right. Maybe specifying what parameters that can this thing be solved, I think would be very helpful. You're right. You're absolutely correct.
Or to do some comparative statics on them in some sense, right?
Exactly. And so for patronage, so this is basically the welfare review of the process. But the idea here is that if you live in a place where there's a lot of patronage, having some rule would always improve the outcomes. That's the insight of the model that I'm trying to convey. So extension, of course, I can talk more about this, but we can skip to the empirical. I'll just briefly talk. What I'm going to do now is to actually endogenize the cause Z, because right now Z comes from heaven. So I wanted to explain the choice between patronage or merit-based mobility regime. So if you assume that the politician collect tax and a mixed regime, and then the state utility function is this.
What was Z again?
Z is the cost that you pay to get you use your rent
cost
to get the benefits, overall benefits. So Z is the cost you pay to access the social status improvement for dissident politicians, and it only applies to dissident politicians.
Yeah, and that you think that endogenizing that is the most important aspect of the model that we need to do right now.
Because the Z would explain. So the high, if it's high Z, it's meritocracy. Low Z is patronage. And so the idea here is you want to come up with the conditions where a society would prefer a high Z or a low Z, like a merit-based society or a patronage-based society. Which one would I choose? So the utility function of the state is basically between the tax and the tax collection, and also the Z. And we assume that the dissonant politicians take rent from the tax, so there's lower overall tax. The trade-off here is that if it's a high Z, if it's a merit-based society, they secure a much stable tax inflow, but a patronage, they get the Z, but it's a more volatile tax collection because R is a random variable, because the rent is random variable. And so what happens is that this is basically the predictions of the model. If there's a high proportion of congruent politicians, gamma, which is this like civic-minded levelness that Besley called, so there's a higher optimal Z because the state wants to maximize the congruent entry. Whereas if it's a lower proportion of the congruent politicians, gamma, it's a lower optimal Z because it is better for a dissonant to take rent in the first term. And so the exogenous variable now becomes gamma.
Why is it better for the dissonant to take rent in the first term? Because then we can identify them, who they are. We don't.
Because you want to get the volume of transactions. Because you know that the politician would serve the second term and they would get the merit base and then they would just run away with the rent, right? They wouldn't get that Z. So the idea in the mixed regime, if you serve two terms, regardless of whether you're congruent or dissonant, you get the.
That I got understood. Yeah.
Okay. So the problem is if you're a dissonant politician.
Yeah.
And you serve the second term, you would take the rent, right?
Yeah.
The state would lose that rent because they wouldn't get it through the first term transfer. So that's why you would want that the Z to be lower. You want the volume of people paying for it. And so the problem becomes reduced to just gamma as the variable that's important. And so the extension actually explains the relationship between the weak states and the mobility regime choice. Basically, the civic-mindedness of political elites, whether they are congruent or dissonant, it influences the tax collection capacity, which influences the choice between the patronage or meritocracy, which influences the pool of politicians running, which influences the quality of policy, and it improves the welfare. But yeah.
If you want to capture like institutional quality, like what would be like the key parameter to try to capture this?
Tax collection. Tax
Okay.
collection.
Okay.
Basically, if there's a lot of like, so the way I try to think about it is, if you know that politicians around you would take that money, you'd be like, you know what? Instead of taking that money, you can give me some, and that's good for me, and as a reward, I can still collect a lot more of that tax money that I lost. Whereas if there's a lot of people who are very good politicians, you know they can collect tax really well, then for you, you're like, yeah, it's fine. You can just put a high Z. We don't really care about the loss of opportunity for these like dissonant politicians. They can just take their rent, and I can collect because I believe that most politicians are not gonna take the tax money.
So from this extension, the state's collection is purely dependent on Z.
Tax collection depends on whether or not you're a congruent or dissonant. So if you're
purely from politicians.
Yes, because the tax, so tax collection is based on whether or not they are going to use that tax for. So tax collection is exogenous in this case, but it depends on whether or not they would keep some of that as rent.
Yeah, that's all it depends. So it just is whether I take this R or not.
Yeah.
Which a congruent politician is never going to take. Only a dissonant one is going to. So.
Yeah, that's the. So now the theory to the real world. So now we go to the oral theory, right? It's like, but now we try to identify the effect of mobility. And so there's like 9. So like what he pointed out, there are 9 different native systems across in Malaysia, and this is the variation that I'm expecting to get in mobility. And so this is what I'm testing. That if it's a more patronage-based system, it has a worse. The worst pool of politician. And so what I want to do is to design an empirical model of mobility regime affects politicians' pool. So I have to find an exogenous variable that affects the social mobility. And so these are the empirical assumptions. The mobility regimes vary by state and election year. We assume it's mixed regime for all states. We assume the variation is generated solely from cos Z and lifetime benefit B and merit reward for long-serving politicians exist in all regimes, and it's the same. Implication is that if it's a higher cost, then it's more meritocratic. That means the pool of politicians in that year would be more congruent. Operationalization, what I've been doing is to get that dato-ship data that I've been talking to everyone about. I also get the candidate data for state elections from 1959. It's a long process because I need to digitize it. It's like a very difficult process. And also state financial statements to see the tax collection. Unit of analysis is on the individual political candidate, but the treatment is on the state election year level. So although the data is on the individual, the treatment is actually on the state and the election year level. So the idea here is that that regime would affect your ability to run for office. And the candidate congruence is currently in progress. Currently, my definition is if they have a prior experience in an NGO or they did some community work prior to their coming to office. I know it's problematic in this scenario, so I'm still thinking about that. The cause Z, this is a much more difficult operationalization because what I want to do is I want to compare two states for election year T with different costs, ZS1 and ZS2. And I want to compare the candidate congruence. The expectation here is that the pool is better if the cost is larger. And from the model, having a low cost meant that there should be a higher observed number of first-term politicians receiving the lifetime benefit. And so the lifetime benefit is actually operationalized as receiving an honorary title. Okay. So this is the operation. The strategy, I don't know yet. It's like I'm still thinking about it. You need to generate that exogenous variation of cost. No progress yet, but the best to me from the model, it is clear that the best identification strategy is the instrumental variable approach. Other causal inference techniques, they require some institutional quirks that actually prone to selection bias. You have an age requirement. Oh yeah, why do they have an age requirement? They have probably a selection bias thing where, so you're not really capturing the effect, right? You're capturing the fact that some people think it's good or bad. So it's a bit selection bias.
Clarification. So the C here is the cost of buying the data.
Yes. If you're a distant politician.
So why is it gonna get even more conflict politician if the cost is higher?
If the cost is higher, because we are assuming it's a mixed regime.
Right.
So if it's a mixed regime, the higher cost, you see that distant politicians will be thrown out of the race, and more. So the pool becomes better. So the congruent wouldn't change. The pool, the people in the pool, which the congruent wouldn't change. The dissonant would be demotivated from entering.
It's just a higher cost for them to get the benefits in the future.
But one that just attract more dissident politicians that would then extract more resources.
Yeah.
No, so if the benefits are fixed and your rent is fixed and your Z is going up, mechanically you have lower benefits of so your stream of benefits that you get from getting the dato-ship is fixed. It's held the constant. So if you increase the cost of getting it, there's a share of people who are now disinterested, and basically it becomes more binding for these people, right?
Yeah. But I guess the question is like, why do we put a cap on the potential benefits? Because
we assume that it's the same for every state. Basically, like because the empirical justification for this is that no matter where you go, there's no difference whether you're a dato or dato-sri. No one cares. No, everyone just sees that dato. No one really like try to distinguish whether you're from which state or that state or that state. No, so typically it's universal.
But once you're in power, you can extract as much resources as possible.
No, you get the same B whether you're congruent or dissonant. It's the same B.
And here is also assuming that the B can only be realized once you're out of office. So these are gains not coming directly from office, but then you can, then that's what I was asking. Are they pecuniary, non-pecuniary? They're just a bundle of these benefits.
Yeah.
But in reality, the B would definitely be realized even while you're in office. I mean, empirically.
Yeah, you can actually modify that. Yes.
So the here's of B, right? As in like, because the Natish system is tiered, like that's three. Presumably, your B will increase with the level of Natish again.
You're right. I can actually modify this model to include that consideration as well. But the issue is also that you would have to also relax that assumption on the term limits. And when the term limit assumption is relaxed, then the model becomes intractable. Yeah, this is a very well-known problem political economy.
Oh, sorry, I'm not sure if you had mentioned it, but how do you define the mixed regime? Is there a certain percentage?
You have to assume.
What is the percentage that you would consider it a mixed regime?
I would say
Of
every
congruence.
every regime is mixed,
Yeah.
but the difference is whether or not the cost Z is different. So that's how the regimes differ from one to another.
Also, in empirical world, how do you measure the voter welfare?
Level of what?
In the
Voter
empirical world, right? How do you measure the voter welfare?
So that one I'm not doing it, but that's a very good future project. But yeah, I'm not too sure how to measure that honestly.
When you mention the two terms, do you mean consecutively, or that takes into account re-elections?
So basically, if you get re-elected, once you're elected, you can run again for office.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So the first stage estimation is you have an instrument that I don't know yet. It generates an exogenous effect on the titles, right? And then the title is the number of honorary titles given to the first-term politicians between time t and t+1. And then the second stage estimation is whether or not the politicians in time t+1 is congruent. So they observe that there's a lot of people receiving the titles in the first term. They would put the cost as low. So that's the logic behind this estimation. So the interpretation, the treatment will be on the state and election day level. There are 135 of them. The treatment will affect all the candidates prior to the election year. Z will be realized when they make a choice to run for office. The expectation is the beta is less than 0, which means that the more titles given to first-time politicians, the lower the cost, the lower the congruence of politicians. That's basically the design. And
in the framework of your model, I clearly see that setting, right? But you could also imagine it in like a Besley Ghatak kind of motivated agents kind of a model that, these are non-pecuniary benefits. So, and it in fact, more likely to be given, politicians are willing to accept lower wages because, I care about, so I'm just saying, not saying that you're more, that just depends upon how you want to think about how these incentives interact, right? And it's a question of carefully frame. That's why I was asking, are you thinking of them as pecuniary, non-pecuniary? How does this affect, or even if you think about who's like a Benabote role kind of models, who selects themselves as the nature of social versus financial incentives change in some sense, right? So that's something that you might want to think a bit about in terms of how do you want to shape the model and
basically think about the specific reward instead of thinking about
and how does this play into it? So in the case of Besley and Ghatak, the model basically says you don't want to keep wages too high in these non-profit sectors because it completely drives out mission motivated people who come into work, right? And there could be these kind of features happening in this place that people don't care for. People come in because they care about this as an ancillary social status benefit, but potentially increases the pool of candidates because I don't know,
I get what you mean.
Yeah.
But I think that the really the outcome that we're really interested in is the voter welfare. And so based on the model's interpretation, which is that the voter welfare is defined by how well the politicians match the state of the world, then I guess that's the answer to that question. But in essence, the concluding remark here is that whenever you want to increase the social benefit for people who run for office, you really have to account for the tension between the positive selection and the negative disciplining effects. When I say you increase the benefit, a lot more people are going to turn up to run for election, but then you really lowers the discipline for the dissident politicians.
Or it could go the other way, right? Because as you increase the benefits, then in the world of Besley and Ghatak, you might say the more motivated people don't come in because now it's all about status, not really about public service.
Exactly.
Right? So
that could be, but it also depends on the wage.
That's why
distribution. You're right. Merit-based reward systems, they can offset the negative effects of the patronage reward systems. And at the end of the day, the cultivation of civic-minded political elites, which I don't know how to do, will shape voter welfare maximizing institutions. So that's basically the conclusion.
I still didn't get the elected aristocrat.
No, I'm just kidding. Well, I guess the aristocrat is someone who gets that title, and they get elected. They become the aristocrat.
No, because I mean, when you talk about aristocrat, it's like one of my project in Sarawak where these are villages and then they are tribes and then the family, the one that become the leader is always coming
It's like-
from that circle.
You're
So
right.
that's the aristocracy.
So,
So this is like a comfort prestige.
No, but for example, my first example that I showed was Sami Bello, right? He was a bus conductor. He was poor. He didn't have anything, and he narrowly won the election by 300 votes. And after he won the election, he became like a star, right, in politics.
Yeah,
Suddenly,
but
he became a star overnight.
that's an elite.
But he's an aristocrat. I mean, in this model, there is an aristocrat, but it's just semantics now. It's just a title. It's okay.
Earlier you showed that this continuity in the structure binary. So you have your instrument already, isn't it?
The what?
You earlier in the first couple slides you showed in the rationale there was a
Oh yeah, on the rationale. Sorry.
15 percentage points jump in
That's an RDD.
probability
Yes,
of
an RDD. Yes.
after across the margin, right? Which is one marginally
Yeah, this one.
margin victory. So you have your instrument here already, right? Like, isn't
Yes.
you were looking for an instrument to
So the issue with this one is that you don't know what the mobility regime is. What is the mobility regime here? Right? It could be that the effect is smaller or the effect larger. That definitely can do that, but you wouldn't have enough sample for that because
But
in one state there's only like 50. I don't know if it's
yeah, I mean, but you could think about distinguishing effect of winning elections by number of terms a politician has already served, right? In the way you were conceptualizing it, and do you see these RDD jumps are not so big for first-time winners, but they are only big but then it's a bit problematic because they're not really kosher comparisons because now a second time around close winner is different from a first time around close winner. So
exactly.
yeah.
But this one, if you look at the empirics, if you look at the data, a lot of these close elections are first term versus first term. Usually it's that. Yeah.
But I'm saying, but you know the timing between when they won and when they got the datorship, right?
That's right. You do have this.
And that would help you slightly sift out what's happening there, right?
Yeah. That's a very good.
So again, another clarification when you talk about like civil-minded politicians. So I'm assuming that you're saying like the state of the world one is always good for the voters.
No,
So that's why you want congruence there, or
the match, whether they match or not. So the state can be 0 or 1.
yeah.
Right? Whether or not the politician matches that state of the world.
But that 0 and 1 too, is it like a good bad? Like when you say 1, does it match with the political voters' preferences, like good outcome? Or
So if it's a 0, if the state of the world is 0, then it basically, and then for a voter, if let's say a politician performs their duties according to what the voters' preferences are, they get delta. So if they match the state of the world, they would match the voters' preferences. That's the model. That's basically the Besley model. Yeah.
So it's already 2:04. We can continue a conversation outside with coffee. Thank you very much. It was super fun, and we look forward to learn more about your research in the future. Okay, so thank you very much, and see you next week, same time. Our friend Rajesh will be presenting. Okay?
Oh, wonderful.
Thank you.
Yeah.